have been serving you, and I have never neglected a commandment of yours, and yet you never gave me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. That's his problem. That's his heart. He's unyielding. He's unforgiving. And you say, well, you said a moment ago that's right. I would say that he was religious, but his religion had made him a more self-centered person. This chapter, folks, is addressed to people that were Pharisaical. And this man was a Pharisee at heart. You see, he was so self-righteous. He did not have the righteousness of God. He thought his father owed him everything. And incidentally, you know that's the mindset today. We live in a world where our culture has this consumer mindset. It's what the church can do for me. You're not meeting my needs. Rather than having the attitude, what can I do for God? What can I do for others? How can I best serve? No, it's a consumer mentality. I want everyone to serve me and meet my needs. Very, very self-centered. So why do I serve? Well, the older son, he served out of duty. It didn't have any joy in his life. I want you to listen to my next statement because I think this is so important for us to understand. You see, you do not work to be accepted. You do not serve to be accepted. You work and you serve because you have already been accepted. You see, the reason that I work and the reason that I do what I do is not to get God to accept me. No, God has already accepted me in and through Jesus Christ. But now that I am accepted, I work. We need to understand that you do not work to be saved, but you work because you are saved. Fourth reason. In the text, he is a person with a superior attitude. Look at verse number 29. He says, I have never neglected a commandment of yours. I've never disobeyed. That's a lie. That is an exaggeration. Because the truth is that none of us perfectly obey the will of our Father. And you see, it's these kind of exaggerations that are common to those that are harboring anger and jealousy and bitterness deep in their hearts. I wonder tonight, to what degree do we display attitudes of superiority in the church? Let me tell you, this is just recently, not too long ago. You know, I preach now. I do 50% of the preaching at the Lynn Street Church in Parkersburg, West Virginia. I don't know how much you know about Parkersburg. But Lynn Street, the oldest church of Christ in the area, is located now in the worst section of town. It's the worst area. Right adjacent to our church building is a homeless shelter. We have the drug recovery center, right, that actually meets in the church's annex. And so our parking lot is filled with druggies. If our church building is left unlocked, it is not uncommon for us to find homeless people sleeping on the inside. You come to church, and you're going to see homeless people and drug people walking up and down the alley behind our building. And recently, I heard one of our folks say, we certainly don't need that kind of trash in our church. That's pretty sad. That's pretty sad. I preached a meeting years ago at the Main Street Church in Manchester, Tennessee, large church. I shared this just briefly with Chuck today. One night I preached on Jesus Touched Me. It was a message about Jesus touching the untouchables and his loving the unlovables and his forgiving the unforgivables. It was a white-collar church. It was a downtown church. It was a very prestigious church. It was a church where a number of the elders were lawyers and doctors. But my message was, Jesus touched the leper. Jesus Christ touched the untouchables. And I simply want to say, there's no room for self-righteousness or the spirit of superiority among us. And I'd never met their new preacher before that meeting. And when I was standing in the foyer after services were over, Carl came to me and he said, "You hit a nerve tonight." Because he said, there are people coming now that don't look like us. In fact, the last night of the meeting, I could still see this man. He responded to the invitation. His ponytail was about that long. He had tattoos all over him. Incidentally, I'm not advertising for tattoos. But he wasn't like us. He didn't look like us. But I'm telling you, that man was thrilled that night as he gave his life to Jesus, and we witnessed his baptism into the Lord. But Carl said to me, he said, "We got a number of folks that have been asking, where are you finding these people? Why aren't you working on some more of the lawyers and doctors in the community? Why are you working on these people?" And I'm thrilled to tell you tonight that one of the main brothers, and I didn't know this at the time, I was totally ignorant of it, but one of the main brothers, after he heard that message, came up to me. And he says, "You have seriously challenged me tonight of my spirit and the kind of a heart that I have. You see, when I think I'm above you, when I think I'm better than you, when I think I'm superior to you, when I think I know more than you, then it's probably going to be pretty tough for me to forgive other people, because I'm just a notch above everyone else. And then the sixth thing, very quickly. He was very judgmental. Now look at verse number 30. This son of yours. Now, have you thought about that? Notice in verse number 30. The text says, this son of yours. Let me tell you what it does not say. He did not say my brother. Evidently, he simply could not bring it. He simply couldn't bring himself to say, you know, my brother. No, he says, this son of yours has wasted your wealth on prostitutes. Let me tell you what Jesus said. In our text at verse number 13, Jesus says that he had wasted his money in wild or in loose living. Now that may or may not have involved his being with prostitutes. Here's what I wonder. I wonder, did this harsh, judgmental brother have first-hand information? Had he hired a private detective to follow his brother around while he was out there in the faraway country living in sin? We need to be very, very careful when it comes to this thing of being judgmental. But when I become harsh, and when I become extremely judgmental of other people, it's going to be difficult for me to have a forgiving heart. I would suggest to you tonight that the older brother had not been sinned against. No, it was his father that had been sinned against. And so if the father is willing to forgive and forget, should not the older son be willing to forgive and to forget also? But maybe, just maybe, if the father had given his younger son a good whipping, the older brother would have felt a lot better about it. Or maybe even more so, if the father had said to the older son, we're going to put your younger brother on probation under your custody for a year, he probably would have really felt good about that. Let me tell you what the Bible says. The Bible says you cannot be a loving son and an unloving brother. The Bible says, if anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. Now, I didn't say that. God said that. This is in 1 John. For he who does not love his brother, whom he had, for he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him: whoever loves God must love his brother also. I don't care where his brother's been. I don't care what his brother has done. I don't care how sinful his brother has been. God says, you can't love me if you don't love your brother. I've said this lots of times. I love Janie, warts and all. Someone said, well, I had noticed that she had that many warts. And I said, well, you haven't lived with her for 59 years. Now, you love, listen, seriously. You love people, warts and all. You cannot love God and not love your brother. You cannot love God and not love your wife. You can't love God and not love your ex. You can't love God and not love your kids. You can't love God and not love your grandkids. You can't love God and not love the folks with whom you work. You can't love God and not love your next door neighbor. You can't do that. And God says, if you say that you love me and you hate your brother, you're a liar. You say, well, boy, that's strong. Yeah, that is. But that's exactly what the Bible says. So, there is a plan for reconciliation between these brothers. Now, you would have to understand that in the Middle East, that in that culture, when there was forgiveness, when there was reconciliation, and when there was acceptance taking place, one of the things that signaled that was eating a meal together. And so in the Eastern culture, when you sat down and you ate a meal together, it communicated reconciliation, it communicated acceptance, it communicated forgiveness. That's the reason that Jesus cooked breakfast for the disciples after his resurrection. You remember that? John chapter 20. They're in Galilee. They've all gone back to fishing because they thought that they were done and that they thought they were finished, and yet Jesus Christ wants to communicate to those men love and forgiveness and acceptance and reconciliation. And so he cooks breakfast for them. And that would have been his way of communicating to those men, you're totally accepted and you're totally forgiven. So how does the father respond to the angry, bitter, and resentful son? Well, he came out and he pleaded with him. I just want you to think about this tonight. He comes out and he pleads with him. The father's compassion did not see, the father didn't become angry. No, he comes out and pleads. He tries to calm down his son. Oh, I didn't know what he said. Maybe he could have said, you know what? Your unforgiving heart is just as bad as your brother sleeping with prostitutes. You see, the father accepted the older son, and I want you to see this, and I'm going to close here. This is one of the sweetest verses in the Bible. He says in verse number 31, he says, son, you've always been with me. And all that is mine is yours. If there's anything that I need to believe tonight, I need to believe that. I need to believe that I'm totally accepted, and I need to believe with all my heart that everything that is God's is mine. And that's why Paul says, what shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He did not spare his own son, but delivered him over for all of us. And how will he not also with him freely give us all things? The problem in life is not being sons. The problem in life is being brothers. And so Jesus in Luke chapter 15 is telling us tonight that all sinners are wanted, are welcomed, are forgiven, and are accepted by God. And so my problem tonight is learning how to be a brother to you. want to come back to my sister-in-law. She was 92 when I preached her funeral. She and my brother had been away from the Lord for 30 years. Had not attended church at all. And my wife had told my mother before my mother died, she says, I am going to do all that I can to influence them, and hopefully they will come back to the Lord. I'm not going to go into the details tonight, but my brother and his wife came back and rededicated their lives and became a part of the Belford Church. They said, we want to come here where you preach. Had an older sister that had been unfaithful for 30 years. Her husband had never attended church. She came back. Her husband was 74 when I baptized him. And it was a wonderful time for my family. They would come every Sunday, and we would typically go out after church for dinner. And then they'd come back to our house for dessert. And so we're sitting in our living room 2 or 3 weeks after, a short time after they had recommitted their lives to Jesus. And we're just having a general discussion, and all of a sudden, my sister-in-law said to me, she says, Ronnie, I have something that I want to tell you. I said, well, what's that? And she says, I went this week and I bought my mother a grave marker. And I told my wife, I said, God has broken her heart. She's not the same woman that sat in a restaurant and bragged, I don't forgive anybody. Don't you ever forget? God can break a heart. God can change an unforgiving heart. I was so thrilled when my sister-in-law said, I bought my mother a grave marker. I knew then that she was a changed woman. She got to the point where she couldn't come to church in her last couple of years, and she'd say to me, she says, won't you bring me your sermons? She says, I want to hear you preach. So what I'm saying as we close tonight, don't leave this world and not let God break your heart to where you will be a forgiving person. Forgiveness is found in Jesus. If you're not a child of God tonight, we invite you to confess Him and be baptized into Him. Maybe you need to leave tonight and be reconciled to someone in your life. If you need prayer, then we invite you to come. Father, send you.